All right, good afternoon all. I'm Subik, one of your three GEs, and today I'm going to talk about the Kathmandu Valley historic architecture and urbanism, and with a specific interest in perspectives on urban morphology. So just to start, I kind of thought about making a connection with where Peter left off in talking about regions. So my purpose here is actually to show where Nepal is and in the same scale. I hope the scale is correct. I double checked it, triple checked it. I think at the same scale. So this is Nepal, and this is the U.S. So at the same scale, this would be the region of Asia, right? And you can see China here, India to the south, China to the north, other countries, right? Up to, I mean, on the east to Iran. Here's Malaysia, and down here is Australia, right? So a vast region. And the second level of region would be, and Peter talked about it in length, would for us here would be the Pacific Northwest, right? And whereas to my surprise, actually, the same kind of in the same scale, the reason that Nepal is this is actually the South Asia region, right? Which what's called the South Asia. So at same scale, it occupied the, I mean, kind of like similar area, right? The Pacific Northwest. Maybe not in terms of actual area, but just in terms of this rectangle. So here's Nepal, a little bit zoomed in South Asia, and at even more finer scale, this is at the state of the country, at the scale of the state and the country. So this is Nepal and Oregon. So the reason I'm comparing it with Oregon and the US is obviously so that you can better understand, right? And so Oregon is actually 1.73 times bigger than Nepal. And this scale is not 100% accurate, I'm sorry, but the longest, like from the west to the eastern tip, lower tip, Nepal is like 510 miles, whereas Oregon is 370 miles. So not a lot of difference. So this length is 370 miles, and this length, sorry, the diagonal length is like 510 miles. So we're talking at the level of state versus another state, but instead of country, and not like known as a state, right? But it's a state as well. And yeah, and this is where Kathmandu, the central region, is. This is this is the area that I'm going to focus on. Although Nepal is, as you can see, much bigger, right? I'm going to focus on Kathmandu, the valley, Kathmandu Valley. So just briefly about Nepal, it's administrative regions. It's 7 provinces, which I think could be compared to the regions in the US, like the 7 or 8 regions in the US. And we have 77 districts comparable to like the 50 states in the US, although the districts are not as much autonomous as the states are, I would say. So so before I begin about the Kathmandu Valley, here it is. I'm going to talk about the Newar House, and I think in a couple of slides, Howard also talked about it, right? And but although, so my point for showing this image is that although I'm gonna just talk about Newar architecture, there's like about 15 other vernacular architecture as well. So yeah, so about the traditional architecture of the Kathmandu Valley that I'm gonna talk about, it has many names. Like when I was studying it, or in like the more popular names are historic architecture, traditional architecture, vernacular architecture. I've even heard some say regional architecture. But at the end, the architecture was developed by the natives of the Kathmandu Valley. And when I say natives, at least a couple of thousand years, like 2,000 years, I would say at least, that they've been inhabiting. And I am a native as well, so I'm a Newar as well. So it sounds like new with an ace, but it's like Newa with double dots. So I mean Newa. So, and a lot has been written about the valley, about the architecture, about the urbanism of the valley, and these are some of the important works. And I would say more foreigners have actually worked on this than Nepali scholars. I think the large volume, like in terms of books. So these 3 volumes are from foreign, I mean, from like mostly like scholars from Germany, Japan, the US. Edward Segler from Harvard University, worked a lot in the Kathmandu Valley, right, in the 70s. So a lot of interest, a lot of work, and this is just few of the large volumes, right? So in short, I'm going to talk about the Kathmandu Valley and my modest attempts as well. So I've worked in a couple of books by now, and like a chapter in each of these, and also wrote about a magazine article on the topic of like ramblers and settlers. I was referring to ramblers, people who pedestrians who ramble on the streets, and settlers who settle and use it as an open space. And I'm going to talk about it in much detail today. So the Kathmandu Valley is Kathmandu Valley is around 250 square miles and has a population of around 2 million to 2.5 million, right? So it's like 250 square miles, and and it's a valley, so it's surrounded by hills on all sides. But the most important thing I think is it had traditionally three main centers, three different kingdoms. They were referred to as kingdoms up until 18th century. So that's not a long ago, right? 18th century. 1768 was when the country was unified. So just the larger topographic view, right, of the valley. And again, Newa people were the inhabitants and who developed this style of architecture or this language of architecture. Natives of the Kathmandu Valley, around 1.35 million or 5% of the population. Most of them in the valley itself, but also spread around the country. And so the Kathmandu Valley was just a small portion of that. This area was actually called Nepal before unification. So it was united, and Nepal was united in 1768. Although the Newar people have never ruled the land, some rulers actually adapted to the native culture and flourished them, right? So today I'm going to talk about the architecture and urbanism of the 14th, the architecture and urbanism that developed between the 14th to 18th century AD, which is also called the prosperous Mulla period, and this is just the name of the dynasty that ruled the country around that between that period. So just like kind of a disclaimer, I am with whatever I will say today, it's not, my point is not to revert back to past and dwell in past and just talk about nostalgia. And I'm not also saying that we should strictly pedestrianize our streets, or I'm not saying that we have to start building in old ways, right? So I think kind of like a disclaimer, but I think my main point is how do we move forward with this knowledge that we have as we end with all this situation. I think the idea of resilience, sustainability has become even more important. And resilient and sustainable were what the older cities were, I think. And although I'm not going to talk about resilience in specific detail. So this is one of the streets, and the next slide, this is one of the areas, traditional areas. I'm going to show a view of that. So the next few slides, I'm going to show the images of some of the streetscape so that you have an idea of what kind of architecture I want to talk about. So starting with Frick Street, the actual name was Jose, native in native tongue, but it was called Frick Street probably because I have a good idea why it was called Frick Street. But this is kind of a semi-modern kind of environment in a very traditional setting. So I love being there. My friend owned this shop. I used to just sit here. So the other image is this more traditional space, and I love this view so much. It's I mean, it's really good. Although this person decided to encroach the land here. So anyways, I think it's more about dwelling for a moment and thinking about it. And I just wanted to put this slide. And 60s and the 70s were a heaven for tourists, and it was legal there, so a lot of foreigners came to the valley, and that's how it kind of influenced the developments as well. And just you could get marijuana in different forms, and this was usually popular in the older in the Frick Street that I just showed. So, and another type of streetscape is this. This is where I grew up. My home is around here. In this view, it's around here. So this is where I grew up, and this is another kind of like a more modern urban scape, but it still maintained the quality that I think even Jane Jacobs talks about, right? All of the 4 points, right? So yeah, so just these slides so that you can have an idea of what I'm kind of trying to talk about, right? So starting with like what I'm going to talk about, the main topic is going to be urban morphology. And so urban morphology is a vast discipline, and it's a multidisciplinary field that and in this field, like a lot of architects, historians, geographers, planners, spatial science, people in the field of spatial science and other urban study fields are engaged. And to formally kind of define urban morphology for the purpose of this presentation's understanding, it is concerned with the form and structure of urban settlements and the process of their formation and transformation. So this idea of not just a static form, but actually of understanding the process of how they form and how they transform is going to be very important. And these are all books from by these three are from European authors, and this is Alison Eisenberg, I think, is in Yale University or Cornell, so she is an American. So this is like the Western views on kind of idea on urban morphology, which I am really inclined to, although I'm talking about Nepal, because they make a lot of sense. And so in terms of theory, this is what I like doing. So today I'm gonna just talk about, so this is what I'm gonna talk about in respect to the architecture and urbanism of the valley. My theory on the major elements of Kathmandu Valley's urban morphology. I'm saying that, what I'm claiming is that urban morphology, or in short, architecture slash urbanism of urbanism can be understood by kind of categorizing the whole thing into six different categories or elements: streets, open spaces, buildings, urban space field, building interface, and public interior. So my point was that to understand a city, we have to understand the larger cityscape or the street configuration down to the public interior, like the interior space, but not like private interior. I'm talking about the mostly public interior, right? So I'm going to talk about this briefly. One other thing is that I wanted to say is that most of these elements intermingle a lot. So I just can't talk about streets and not talk about open space or vice versa, right? But my point, I think, is to show how they achieve that mix successfully, or how they have achieved this mix successfully. And one thing is that I'm also, I mean, I feel that this is not only true for Kathmandu Valley. If it was only true, I wouldn't probably be wanting to give this talk, because I think this is universal. This is a universal language of cities, right? So again, before I formally begin, I kind of made a promise to Peter that I would show a connection between Eugene and Kathmandu, right? And so Kathmandu and Eugene actually are sister cities. So we have a Eugene Kathmandu city sister city association. So it's like it is like how do I put it? It is a legit organization, and we are legit sister cities as well. So I only have 2 slides to not compare, but like show Eugene and Kathmandu Valley side by side. This is in the same scale, and to my surprise, again, the scale of the Kathmandu Valley and Eugene Springfield area, metro area, is almost the same, right? It covers all of Eugene metro area, and this is the valley, right? So next slide is the next slide I'm gonna show. It might be a bit hard to kind of perceive at first, but both of the images are in the same scale. So this is the core of Eugene, and this is the core of one of the historic towns in the valley. So at the core, I think no matter where you are from, the basic necessities are the same, but this grand difference in the core structure is like truly, truly amazing. This here is the Palace Square. So it's probably up until and I'm not saying this is all of Kathmandu. Like Kathmandu also has like larger modern structures which are bigger. maybe even at the scale of what we have in Eugene. But I mean, just comparing the historic core, right? What this was my intention, and this was the Palace Square, which I'm going to talk about, which looks really small in just in comparison with our city office, right? Um, so, and yep. So I kind of fulfilled my promise to kind of link Eugene, but I think it's not only about that. It's also about like trying to give a perspective of how the city was. Cities like and I'm talking about the Kathmandu Valley cities. And I worked on and this is going to be the last slide comparing them. So not only the size but the mix. So these red areas are like shops. These are art and craft shops, mostly in the ground floor or in the upper floors as well. And the blue ones you see are retail stores. So I have a list, like I have a count. I mean, it's not hard to do since I made this map. There's like hundreds of stores in such a small area, right? It's at the same scale again. So I mean, a lot can be talked about just like in terms of the idea of how cities are formed and transformed just from this slide. But I just wanted to put this out so that you have an understanding of like the mix in a like a really old really old dense neighborhood, right? Um, so yeah, let's continue with the 6 points. I'm just gonna refer to it as 6 points of urban morphology. First was the street network. Organically developed street network over hundreds of years, from a small nucleus with few streets to a large city centered around the palace squares, which influence the major axis of the whole town as well. So this is a perfect image of this is the core, one of the historic towns in the valley. And I'm trying to show how the street network, this is the figure on the ground, right, as well, how the street network is kind of defining the form of the city and how it's connected with the open spaces. So I think a lot more to dwell than me talking about it, right? I mean, dwell on the image and contemplate further. The other thing was it also kind of structured the organization of caste. So caste was like this, I mean, it's hard to define, but even within the Newar community or the Newar ethnicity, we had different caste and we would be known by our last name. You can see here, this is my last name. I'm here as like the community was here as well. So, I mean, we were a part of this community as well, although this is not my hometown or my neighborhood. But my point is the street structure also defined the distribution of different class of people, so to speak, right, or caste. And this is amazing, like this relationship between street network and culture is what I find to be simply amazing. So more on street network. So this is the historic street network, right, which actually defined the main axis of the city and was also went to Tibet. So this route here went north to Tibet and south to India. So that's why this center probably developed because of trade and commerce. So another importance of like street networks and how it like an economy and trade. So that relationship with like the relationship between the street network, trade, commerce, and the development of a city, right? And so each of the three major towns had these major paths leading to Tibet or China, as you can see in each of the three towns here. So I think this is the last slide on streets. The last point I'm trying to make is how streets act as the main thoroughfare, the main axis that defines the core of a city. Second point is open spaces. So in Nepal, in Kathmandu Valley, we had like open spaces from palace squares, large monasteries, which are, I mean, monastery is not a perfect word, but like Baha is what it's called. But they were basically courtyard structures, temple complexes, smaller residential courtyards, open stages, plinths of temples, neighborhood intersections known as chokes, or just about any other space outside the building. And it would, just like in any other place, the idea of the open spaces were for activities like socializing, religious functions as well, drying of fruits and clothes. So the scale from the large global activity, like the regional activities or the city-wide activities, to the personal activities, all happen in the same social space. And I'm going to show this. So this is in pink. I'm trying to show the distribution of what's the Baha. And so Bahas were like traditional courts with main temples or shrines, and these are in English. I mean, the English translation would be monasteries, although it's not a perfect translation. But my purpose here is to show how the level of like how these Bahas were like spread all across town. And this is the Kathmandu town. That's the Kathmandu. It's just Kathmandu, and there's like more than 90 Bahas in this diagram at least, right? And again, more open courtyards, more closed courtyards to more open courtyards, right? And versus the open space, figure and ground again, although in different, slightly different, not black and white, or red and white, but slightly different form. It's kind of figure and ground as well, where the foreground are the open spaces, right? And everyday open spaces used by people for various reasons, just for socializing or for gathering. This is a wedding party. I have a feeling this is a wedding party. So we like it's not like, and here community events used to happen as well. So used for different purposes. And these are everyday purposes, right? And the next slide I'm going to show is for a national festival. Like, I mean, I can call it like, because it's celebrated well I can call it a national festival. So it's yearly festival. And this is what happens to this place. Like, it's filled with people, right? So what I'm trying to show is this importance of the same space in everyday life and during different specific big occasions. So the other form of open space would be the temple complexes, right? And this is my neighborhood as well. I'm going to talk about this a bit more. So what I decided to kind of share was the amount of playgrounds that I had. So these are all the playgrounds. You can see this is 50 meters or like 160 feet. So I traveled, and this was before my, before I was like 12 or 13, right? So around like 9, 10 to like 13, 14, or even 5, 6 or 7 years old, I like go out and like play in all like everywhere, right? So I think that's what the importance is as well. I'm just sharing my experience of how it was like. And this is my house. And we had a big temple complex, and I used to play there, like obviously go there, right? And I think this is last of the open spaces slides. This is fascinating to me because of 2 reasons. Like, people here they're staying here for the whole day. Like, I used to be here the whole weekend, just here on top of the plains, just for the whole day, just sitting there. And the other thing is the age groups, like all people of age groups gather here for not consciously, but it's just that kind of place, right? You can see there's no such strict zoning laws. You can sell your stuff here, and everyone knows like it's their way of living. So sometimes the municipal police officers come and kind of go after these people, but it's otherwise mostly it's like some people are smoking, some people are they are talking about probably or how the morning went, these 2 guys. I'm just guessing. But I mean, personally, I've stayed in this specific place for a long time before I came to the US, actually. I mean, more than my home. Like, I used to stay in like this area. But my point is actually I'm just trying to show the importance and embeddedness of open spaces, right, in a city. But sadly, that structure got collapsed in the 2015 earthquake, and we are in the process of making. This is from last year. Although I've not been home for a long time, my friend took this and sent it to me. So I just talked about streets and open spaces, and now I'm going to talk about the buildings. So buildings formed an important part of the urban environment for sure. So there's like Howard talked about a lot of or several building types. What I'm going to talk about is not like types, but these are not types, but it's hard to define, but I mean we can call them types. Just three different types of buildings today, but there's many more. So temples. The importance of temples is that for this purpose is, yes, they were grand structures for sure, but also that these were the sacred structures and they were spread everywhere and were the center of the community, right? And were visited daily by people and had like values for every purposes, like many purpose in people's everyday life, right? So just the like the drawing elevation and section of the structure of the temple in my neighborhood. This was next to my house, so I was blessed to have like wonderful architecture around me. Although I actually, when I think about it, you don't care as much. Although I was in architecture when you were there, or when it's in your backyard, right? This completely fell down as well, but it was reconstructed lately. Didn't sorry, not completely, but the top portion, and it was reconstructed like recently. The other building type I wanted to discuss was what's called, it's a public rest house. So originally meant, I think, for travelers who travel between places. They had this rest house where they could take the night, like sleep for the night, right? But they're also like now, like traveling, it's kind of an outdated concept, and it's only used for community purposes, right? Shelter for like for locals as a community area and as a social space as well, right? But I put this under buildings because it is a part of a building, right? It is mostly a building structure as well. So in terms of buildings, the Neva house is a very special and like popular prototype of architecture that Howard briefly talked about. This image just to show how it looks like. It looks like. So mostly the Neva house were in clusters. They never stood like alone, as you can imagine in a tight neighborhood, right? Uh, and this is the courtyard, and this is the neighborhood structure. So almost, I mean, this was the basic tissue, I would say, of the entire urban area, right? And individual houses that face the street on the outside, whereas a courtyard on the inside. So just the elevation of the buildings, how they look like, a lot like basically constructed out of local brick, wood, and stone for foundations. But my purpose actually is to like show how it influences, how it's a part of the context rather, right? So talking about although I'm just introducing what the components are of this house. It's going to make a connection with the context later on. So in the ground floor, there's generally shop and storage. So it says spaces for the corpse. I think I think it's a mistake. It's not meant to be a space for corpse. I don't know why it's there. But then, and I didn't want to change the original drawing either. So it used to, like, it's usually has a shop and storage. The second floor is used for sleeping. The third floor is more elaborate, has elaborate, elaborately carved windows. It's also a form of bay window. It's called like sonzia. It's like grilled. It has like grilled window panes, grilled panes, lattice windows. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. Lattice windows. And this would be the living room, and on the top floor would be kitchen and prayer room. And like they would try to make most out of the slope-proof area, like that would be formed here by the slope-proof intersection. So the reason this section is important because it makes a lot more sense with the fourth level. So from street open spaces and buildings now to the urban space field. So urban space field is something that I kind of revised. And so the one question that I had was how many people. So I would say one family of 5 people, around 5 people. But the thing though is, let me go back to this diagram, right? 5 people in each of these would mean that one courtyard would have like 50 people, right? So that's that was how the basic nucleus of the community would be formed. So around, I mean, 40 people, I would guess. So again, coming back to this building urban space field, um, it's an immediate space outside the building, fronting the streets or courtyards, and the spaces abutting a house's wall would be used for, like, the space abutting a house's exterior wall, used for watching passers-by, hanging out outside a shop, etc. And as I will show. So this is what I'm talking about, like space outside the building, but used for different purposes. Here we have like this palace. This is a palace, and outside there's actually, although like there's more or less one generation of people here, it's mostly mixed as well. And also sitting outside of this shop, just looking at passers-by, and also using it for everyday activities like cleaning, right? Or sorry, washing clothes. The fifth one is the building interface. And what I mean by that is like buildings maintaining a dialogue with the outside. And how we would maintain dialogues with the outside is mostly through the windows. And like I said previously, a typical house would have elaborately carved windows on the third floor and the living room, so that it's connected with the outside. It can be, and also it's a show of class as well, of people living there. As you can see, other buildings, not all buildings have like such elaborate windows. And again, this is just a section showing how it's would look like in the on the inside, and the inside of the room, right? And the purpose of this is to, and it's, you can maneuver it as well as will, according to your will. And just looking outside and being a part of what's, like Jane Jacobs also said, like eyes on the street, looking out, being a part of the outside, right? So in the section again, the living room would be mostly connected through windows, and also connected on the outside, because the other end would have courtyards, right? And whereas the right or the west has streets. And also similar flow of movement, not like physical, but also like, if not physical, certainly like visual movement, visual interaction at the street level with the shops here. So my point is I'm trying to show how the smallest unit of the fabric is maintaining a conversation with the whole city, right? The link is through the streets, and the streets are like connected across the whole city. So from the smallest unit to the largest kind of member of the urban fabric. The other reason for having such elaborate windows, elaborately carved windows, was that the houses would be would lie on the route of like processions, like this is chariot procession, and it would go across the whole town, and people and the houses next to them would want to have some like something to show in the form of like a really good looking aesthetic building. So that's one of other reason why they would elaborately carve the windows. Although something like this would happen as well sometimes. Just a really amazing image of the chariot. It's called a chariot, right? I mean, it's basic common word. Chariot crashing on one of the houses. So last on my list is this is the public building interiors. I forgot to put the image here, but like it's about blurring, and I've talked about this as well briefly, like blurring the distinction between inside and outside, or is the interior more a part of the building or the urban space, right? This kind of blurring of distinction. And examples could be shops in the ground floor, continuous paths beneath the buildings to reach other houses, and the rest house that I showed are good examples of like what I'm talking about. So again, in the section like the shop, which has a connection, right? It's clearly this person is outside, this person is inside, but it looks like he doesn't want to be there because like, but he has to be there, but because it's more outside the building than inside. And this is not a, so the point is, it's not a uncommon phenomenon, right? It's a very common thing like in all cities, but the point that I'm trying to make is this happening at such intensity and at repeating uniformly across the entire like city is what I think I find to be fascinating, and to be and for a single building to be a part uniquely enough of the larger city fabric again is what I find to be like amazing, and why I'm like talking about this. So in short, not an unusual phenomenon, not something unheard of, but but the number of times it's repeated across the whole city is what is fascinating. Um, so yeah, that's is what I have. So in short, to repeat it, just to like kind of summarize what I talked about, just basically trying to understand myself actually through this presenting, through like when I'm making this, by making this kind of presentation, understand the basic elements of morphology that makes up the city, and trying to connect it with the larger context or the larger urban context. So thank you so much.